One liberty-minded lawmaker in the Senate isn't too happy that his chamber will be receiving the FISA reauthorization bill. Rand Paul tweeted, "No American should have their right to privacy taken away. Hashtag filibuster." And Democratic Senator Ron Wyden from the great state of Oregon was on the same page, tweeting, "The House just passed a bill that does absolutely nothing to protect the vast majority of law-abiding Americans from warrantless government spying. Hashtag Section 702, hashtag FISA." Senator Wyden also promised he'd filibuster the legislation, but of course leadership supports this freedom-killing bill. Right before the House voted, Speaker Paul Ryan slammed an amendment introduced by Michigan Congressman Justin Amash that would have required warrants for the search of Americans' data through Section 702 and codified the end of about collection.
You pass the Amash amendment, you bring that firewall right back up. You pass the Amash amendment and defeat this underlying bill, we go back to those days where we are flying blind on protecting our country from terrorism.
Flying blind. Here to explain why Paul Ryan is mistaken, it's that very same Michigan Republican Congressman, Justin Amash. Welcome back, Congressman.
Thanks for having me on, Kennedy.
So tell me, what's most troubling about you what's the most troubling part about today's vote?
Well, it's troubling that we have people in leadership on both sides who mislead members of Congress, mislead the American people about my amendment and about what the program does. You heard Speaker Ryan talking about building walls and not allowing people to share information, and the amendment wouldn't do any of that. It would allow the government to go after foreign intelligence, to go after foreigners overseas, which is what FISA 702 is supposed to be about. But my amendment would protect the rights of the American people. It would require a warrant when you want to search on Americans, and that's what our Constitution requires.
And something that I didn't touch on in the monologue, which is very important, are those backdoor searches that law enforcement can do without warrants. They can go in and seize any of the information that's been caught up on Americans about perhaps a foreign target, but then that information can be used in other law enforcement investigations. That will continue with the reauthorization, correct?
Correct. So the government has a huge store and stores of our data, of American data that they've swept in while they do conduct foreign surveillance. And the government says they want to just go be able to search that data without getting a warrant. And when you have searches on Americans, our Constitution requires that you get a warrant. It's pretty simple. You have to have probable cause and you have to have a particularized warrant, and they don't have that. And they don't want to have that. So that's why they fought against my amendment and why they made up a lot of things, frankly, about what the amendment does.
Yeah, it's the kind of hyperbole that disgusts me when Democrats do it, particularly when they're talking about health care and immigration and even tax reform. And to see Republicans doing that when it comes to something like civil liberties, when we know there have been so many egregious examples of the government overstepping its bounds. I mean, the FISA court smacked down the NSA for that about collection, which will restart for another 6 years. Now, Devin Nunes, the House Oversight Chairman, said that in the measure that was passed in the House today, there are rigorous measures to protect privacy. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. They have a very weak warrant requirement. It would apply in almost no circumstances. And in the very rare, very few circumstances in which it would apply, it would protect criminal suspects while not protecting people who are not suspected of any wrongdoing. So it works totally backwards. It's totally the opposite of what you'd expect under our constitutional system of government, where you want to protect people, especially who are not suspected of anything. So it's a ridiculous requirement the way they have it set up. It doesn't really protect anyone. And what we wanted was a real warrant requirement that would protect Americans.
And let's talk a little bit about this unmasking, because that's the issue that the president has. Is there anything about unmasking that is correlated with this sort of foreign collection?
Well, it's related, because if you are collecting more information on Americans and able to search more things on Americans up front, then you run the risk of having things unmasked later on. So the most important thing we can do is to limit the amount of Americans' information in these databases, but going beyond that, we also have to prevent the ability of the government to search these databases on Americans. and that deals with some of the unmasking issues.
Yeah.
But they're related, but they're not identical issues.
No, they're not identical, but the fact that law enforcement can go in and get some of that information, it's very problematic. And, you know, we talk about the problems with one-size-fits-all measures in education with things like Common Core. This is one-size-fits-all intelligence. And it seems as though, although it's very well-intentioned, the unintended consequences can be so problematic. What can the Senate do at this point to mitigate some of those consequences?
I think the senators need to do what we did in the House, except they need to pass the right kind of legislation. We passed the wrong legislation in the House, but they need to work hard. They need to try to educate their colleagues, the ones who are on the right side of this, such as Senator Rand Paul and Senator Ron Wyden. Go out, educate their colleagues, educate the American people, get people engaged at home, and really fight. Do everything you can to fight this. Because if people at home aren't engaged on it, and if members of Congress aren't engaged on it, they're going to vote to reauthorize. So we have to make sure they understand the issues and they are understanding the importance of protecting people's rights.
How does Section 702 make us less safe?
How does Section 702 make us less safe? Well, if it's misinterpreted and you collect people's data like they're doing currently, and it's American data, and then you're searching it without a warrant, it puts us all at risk. If our privacy is at risk, all of our liberties are at risk. So we have to make sure that the government is protecting our rights, not invading our privacy, and that's why we need to have some limits on Section 702 for the use of American data.
Thank you for your time, Congressman Amash. I'm sorry the vote didn't go your way. We were looking forward to that amendment's passage. So we all have to keep up the good fight. You're doing it in D.C., and thank you so much for that.